As I just mentioned, we're going to go ahead and bring up Larry Rivera, and his presentation now is going to be my top 10 discoveries in the 2017 to 2021 NARA document releases. And Larry asked me not to give you a rerun of his intro from yesterday, but to just tell you that he is the author of a fabulous book called The Four Horsemen. Is that the JFK Horsemen? Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Rivera.
Yeah, let's thank Randy Benson. That was a wonderful presentation and a great segue to what we're going to talk about next, documents. Okay, so in the 10th position, and this has already been spoken about before, and one of the things that you have to understand here about new documents, when you get new documents, researchers must go back and look at old documents and see how they compare and in what place they belong in the whole story, this whole case, all right? What piece of the puzzle that document is going to fill. So with that in mind, all right, we have our number 10. That's the, has already been spoken about. Mal mentioned this yesterday, that the mayor of Dallas in 1963, Earl Cabell, was CIA. This is his secrecy agreement. And this was one of the very first documents that, that hit the internet in 2017, in fact, July 27, 2017. This is one of the first one that was teased out. And the implications are obvious, because when you have the brother of the deputy director of the CIA, all right, wouldn't you think that those two would have been in contact that day? All right, and here's Earl Cabell, one of the few images actually, and it's funny, you look at this picture and everybody has got a frown, you know, LBJ, is this pointer here? Yeah, you got LBJ and you got Connolly and Earl Cabell, and Jackie's the only one that's smiling in that one. So why is this new revelation important? Well, on the afternoon of the assassination, while JFK was moribund and being attended to by the Parkland doctors, Cabell was actively making sure that the justice of the peace was available to sign off on JFK's death certificate and get the body out of Dallas without delay, bypassing the county statutes of autopsy, the requirement of an autopsy. We all know about that one. Now, motorcycle escort Douglas Jackson, with whom I have whose son I have been in contact with in the past in doing my research, okay, he was outside the JFK trauma room while he was being worked on, okay, and without knowing, he turned away a justice of the peace who showed up as requested. When informed, Cabell, who was inside trauma room, where he wasn't even supposed to be, okay, he came out and he ordered Jackson to go to his motorcycle and radio the dispatcher to request another justice of the peace immediately. There's Jackson in the motorcade. He was the fourth outrider there next to James Chaney. Now, from Officer Douglas Jackson's personal manuscript detailing his experiences on 22 November 1963, including this one, okay, with Earl Cabell. Now, there's a story to this document here, okay? This is in a recent release. This was, Douglas Jackson was the only officer, escort, who was asked to write an account of what he went through that day, okay? Now, I was looking for this document, and when I got in touch with Douglas Jackson's son, he says, yeah, I have the original, and I'm planning on donating it to the 6th floor museum. So, one day I was doing research on Weisberg's site, and I found this. And it is this is, I believe, a 4-page document. This is just one of the pages, I think the first one. And lo and behold, Mr. Henry Wade, okay, had made the document available to Weisberg. Okay, that's why Henry Wade has been maligned so much in this case. Well, he had a relationship with Harold Weisberg, and they corresponded quite a bit. And Weisberg said, look, I'm looking for this document on Jackson. And he said, I have it. You know, I can transcribe it for you. I have my secretary, she'll transcribe it. And this is a transcription. And by the way, this document was also used by an officer named James Bowles, who did something like a 120-page report on the motorcycle escort and the dicta belts and everything. And he also cited heavily from this manuscript. So it goes like this. I went inside to ask him, and before I could say anything, he said, does your radio work? I said, yes. And he said, come on, come on, anyway. He said, come on, and we went, and I guess it's supposed to be and we went to my motorcycle, and we passed his wife in the hallway. He told her that he would be right back. We got to my motor. He told me to call the dispatcher and have them get a justice of the peace to the hospital in a hurry. Okay, so that's how you make that connection. Now, since we're talking about the same family, a direct connection between Clay Shaw and the CIA. Okay, now Jim Garrison would have loved to have gotten his hands on this one. General Charles Cabell was deputy director of the CIA at the time, was recipient of a soiree thrown in his honor by Clay Shaw, none other than Clay Shaw, and his deputy director, and his deputy Jesse Core in New Orleans. Jesse Core was his publicist, his marketing director. Okay, Jesse Core was also an informant for SA Special Agent Warren C. DeBrew, and provided the FBI with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee flyer made by Lee Oswald while he was leafletting in downtown New Orleans. Now, Jesse Core worked for Clay Shaw. Okay, at the same time, he moonlighted as an informant for Warren DeBrew. Okay, so we get this document, and it describes in detail the lineage of the Cabell family, going back to his grandfather, who was a Confederate general. Okay, and if you look here, right down at in the middle at the bottom there, Clay Shaw, program chairman, will introduce Cabell. Okay, and the document goes on, like I said, giving an entire breakdown. These are also documents that confirm Jesse Core's relationship with Warren DeBrew, okay, as an informant. And this is the Hands Off Cuba leaflet that he provided, okay, the FBI with. And at the bottom, it's got, it says a notation received from Jesse Core on such date. Number 8. Anybody here know who William Morgan was? All right. There are a lot of parallels between William Morgan and Lee Oswald, all right? And I don't think it's a coincidence, okay? The story of William Morgan is unique. He showed up in the Escambray in 1958. This is a mountain range in Cuba, and he formed a bond with Eloy Gutierrez Menoyo, who led the Second Front of the Escambray, a group of guerrillas who were fighting in the Escambray mountain range, which was much closer to Havana than Fidel Castro, who was working his way from the Sierra Maestra. Despite the skepticism of previous authors, there are 3 authors on William Morgan, very good books, by the way. They have never been able to prove that he worked for the CIA because they did not have the documents. In the new release, okay, we have, you know, at least one document that I believe is a smoking gun. We'll see it in a minute. Now, Morgan, like Gutierrez, Menoyo was loyal to Castro until he unleashed the communist state after everything they did to overthrow Batista. His execution at the hands of Castro in February 1961 more or less proves that Castro was on to Morgan's true mission on behalf of the CIA. And as you can see, the the map of Cuba, where you've got Escambray much closer to Havana than Sierra Maestra. It took Fidel Castro a whole week to arrive in Havana after overthrowing Batista. It was Gutierrez Menoyo and William Morgan, the first ones to arrive in Havana. So we get this smoking gun document, and I'll go to the document, and then I'll go back. All right? And it says, and this is all CIA intelligence jargon, you know, requesting a secret writing system from SAB to be passed on to Major William Morgan. Second one, check with Cuban desk prior to issuing a system to ensure that this action might not be crossing lines operationally. Okay. Western Hemisphere 4, which is JAMWAVE, had made known its objections to the ACSI, Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence, on any use of Morgan approximately 6 months ago. It was still felt that to have any dealings with Morgan was a mistake. Havana Station is being informed ACSI dealings with Morgan by cable. And there it is. Now, was Morgan's mission the same type of Lee Oswald into the Soviet Union, which was a couple of years later? The parallels between Morgan and Lee are striking. If Morgan was really working for the CIA, his solitary sojourn into the Escambray in January 1958 took a lot of nerve. In essence, it would appear that both Oswald and Morgan ended up as pawns who were subject to covert operations deemed necessary by their handlers higher up in the chain of command. For example, as happened with Oswald, they made him out to be a malcontent, unable to adjust to normal life. In fact, William Morgan worked in the circus, and he was an expert in knives and all kinds of things, you know. They made him out to be a malcontent, unable to adjust to normal life with a dishonorable discharge. Sound familiar? That's right. A man who abandoned his family in Toledo, Ohio, to go live with the Crusaders' life in Cuba, even taking a Cuban wife and having children with her, just like Lee did in the Soviet Union. All right? Nice family picture. Number 7 comes in at number 7. A small, and I mean a small portion of David Sanchez Morales' 201 file characterizing him as a one-man gang, and he sure was. David Sanchez Morales, alias El Indio, is one of the most enigmatic figures of the Cold War culture of the 50s and 60s. With the ARRB, JFK-related document releases of 2017 and 18, we are now beginning to obtain a clearer picture of this so-called one-man gang who took care of business that others were unable or unwilling to. The reason Sanchez Morales is important in the JFK assassination saga is that after his death in 1978 of a heart attack, quote unquote, at the young age of 53, while the HSCA was looking to interview him, 2 key individuals, Ruben Rocky Carbajal and his attorney, Robert Walton, gave interviews to several authors revealing that while inebriated, Sanchez Morales had boasted being involved in both the JFK and the Robert F. Kennedy assassination. Now, let's take a look at a couple of these documents. As you can see, this is a cover document, a cover page. It says, pre-1960, documents removed. Post-1963, documents removed. Okay, copies of sanitized documents. Now, documents dated 54 and 1975. Copy of bio, sanitized for the HSCA. The file contains, I think, something like 61 pages. You know, I would estimate that David Sanchez Morales' entire file would probably cover 10,000 pages. Let's just put it, you know, that way. So within those documents, we find a secrecy agreement dated 4 July 1952. We start to get fitness reports. You know that all these spooks had fitness reports. They had to have them once a year. All right, and this is chock full of information, okay, on what his duties and responsibilities were and what he was all about. Now, this Morales is a one-man gang. That's the one sentence that tells it all. But as you can see here, this is a page of his file that shows where he was stationed, what he was doing, in what city, what country, and what year. A lot of redactions. But we're left with, at the bottom there, in red, where it says where he was in 1960. And in 1960, obviously, he was in Havana. Okay, the crucial years from 58 to 1963 show how Morales was deeply involved in the Cuba problem. After leaving Havana in October 1960, he continued his assault on Cuba, working for JM Wave in Miami under Ted Shackley. Morales' specialty was paramilitary operations, PM, and foreign intelligence, which means recruitment of locals to work for the CIA. Okay, he scouted, recruited, organized, implemented this type of discrete warfare against any foe deemed so by the CIA. His most notable work was in Cuba, and his fitness reports praise Morales as simply being the best in the field. His fluency in Spanish and the color of his skin enabled him to infiltrate any Latin American country where the assignment was strictly black operations, assassinations, guerrilla warfare, infiltration, exfiltration. And one notable area of expertise, UDT, which stands for Underwater Demolition Team. All right? Here you can see what I've been talking about. And all of his reports are just outstanding, glowing. Here's one from William Harvey, all right? And William Harvey is praising him. He says he's been in the vortex of Cuba field operations for the past 4.5 years. You know. Now, another document, okay, that comes out of the Morales file, and I don't know how this one got in here, but it's very interesting because, and I'll read it here briefly, that he had spoken to many Cuban exiles and personal, this is the man doing the report, and as a result, has come to the conclusion that the recent invasion was badly handled from every aspect by the CIA. Brigham advised that a segment of the Cuban exiles are of the opinion that the recent Cuban invasion was doomed to fail by design on the part of CIA and are holding CIA responsible. This means that the Cubans, the exiles, did not blame Kennedy for the failure of the Bay of Pigs, which is what we've been led to believe, correct? All along. That, hey, Kennedy was the one who called off the air support and this and that, But in this document, the Cuban exiles are blaming the CIA, and they are naming names, all right? And we're able to ascertain the names of the CIA people responsible for the Cuban invasion, and they are Bernard Barker, David Morales, then an FNU, first name unknown, Williamson, and on and on and on. So we're starting to get little strands from these documents. We're getting leftovers. I mean, these aren't even leftovers, So, whoop. So, on March the 4th, 1960, the French steamship La Coubre exploded in Havana Harbor while ammunition and armaments were being offloaded, killing over 100 people. To this date, all files regarding the La Coubre remain classified by the U.S. government. Now, why would that be? With Morales being in Cuba at the time, according to his personnel file, and one of his specialties being underwater demolition, does it take a rocket scientist to infer that Morales, could have been involved in this heinous act of terrorism? And guess what happens? Come October, okay, we get this order here to not make any of David Morales' files available to anybody. Interesting, huh? And there's a picture of the event of the La Coubre. Now, these one-man gang responsibilities, this document just spells it all out, spots, trains, recruits, selected PM agents, paramilitary, rat line operations, okay, an organized effort to move personnel and or material by clandestine means across a denied area or border. This comes from the DOD. So Morales was definitely a very important player. And the new documents, these few documents, I have to put them in number 7. Number 6, direct connection between the Mexican presidents and the CIA, especially during the crucial years of 1963 and 1964. Okay, and these guys were Adolfo López Mateos, Gustavo Díaz Ordaz, Luis Echeverría. Luis Echeverría, notorious. He passed very recently. He is the one responsible for, if anybody is familiar with the Tlatelolco massacre, where the security forces massacred more than 300 students who were protesting their rights, for education. And this was done right before the Olympics in 1968. And this man to the right, to the extreme right, was the one responsible for that. And who were directly involved in the joint U.S.-Mexico wiretapping operation project against Soviet and Cuban embassies, codenamed Le Envoy. And there is a photo, at least a photocopy, of what the endless banks of tape recorders, sophisticated recorders, that were used to record and intercept the phone calls. You would think that if Lee Harvey Oswald called the Soviet embassy, they would have had him on one of these machines. All right. So, Lirama at the top, and this is just to show you that even while he was a sitting president, okay, the next president, who was Gustavo Díaz Ordaz, he was still at the top of the food chain here. If you look at the top here, Lirama, to the right, there's okay, right there. That's the president of Mexico at the time, all right? So being president did not preclude him from continuing to work with the CIA. And we have this one, all right? This is the Win Scott's third marriage in Mexico City. And all the players are there. And even more, his best man is Adolfo López Mateos, who was the president at the time. This wedding was in 1962. Okay, and here are pictures. This is a very rare video, okay, that shows and proves the relationship that existed between Win Scott and all these presidents. They're all in his pocket. Here's López Mateos with Luis Echeverría, and the best man signs the wedding register. Number 5. This one is very personal to me because I've been doing extensive research on Sylvia. The CIA cannot produce Sylvia Duran's original affidavit statement from the weekend of the assassination. How significant is that? The only thing that exists is a report that the CIA wrote of the content of the statement, okay, but not the original one. Now, the newly declassified documents reveal that what came out of Mexico City was a far cry from what Duran really endured during her 2 interrogations on 23 and 27 November 1963. As seen in Duran's translated memoir, which I found a few years ago, a memoir written by her in Spanish about what she went through, the Duran interrogations did not go smoothly and without any major consequences, as falsely reported by the CIA asset, Mexico City Undersecretary of Government Luis Echeverría. Now, Mexico City Station comments that the second pickup of Sylvia Duran, which was made on the government's initiative without prior consultation with Station or the U.S. Embassy, obviously evidence of a great desire of Mexican authorities to be of service. Immediately after pickup, Echeverría had received instructions from Litenzor. Litenzor is the president, is López Mateos, personally not to release Duran until Win Scott said so. He was in control, trust me. At headquarters, request Chief of Station furnished interrogation questions to Echeverría the night of 27 November. So Win Scott is the one who is the puppet master in the Duran affair. There's no doubt about that. Now, instead of what really happened to Sylvia, where they beat the crap out of her and her husband, they broke his jaw, they intimidated her, they did psychological abuse towards her. in a manner that, you know, you have to read her memoir in order to understand what really happened to her. And Echeverria, this is what came out. This is what Echeverria told the CIA chief of station. Duran completely cooperative and gave written statement attesting to 2 visits of Oswald. Could not remember exact dates, okay? Said he a communist. She said that Oswald told her that he was a communist and an admirer of Castro. Wanted her help to get a transit visa to Cuba in order to go to the USSR. That's another misconception that's been out there, that you could go to Cuba or the Soviet Union anytime you wanted in these times. Not so. If you look at the passport of Lee Oswald, the one that he renewed in June of 1963, there is a big note that says, not good for travel to Cuba or any of these, you know, Soviet satellite countries at the time. All right, so there's a conundrum. You know, if you're going to go to Cuba, you're not going to go through Mexico, okay? Because your passport says so, and that's a topic for we can discuss that for hours. But you know, just so you know that that just did not exist. That you could just fly into Cuba through Mexico City with your U.S. passport. That was not allowed at the time. So we get the documents that says that they're sending a photostatic copy of the 10-page statement of Sylvia Duran, which was obtained by Echeverria. And it is sent, they're going to send it in a private jet, you know, with Roger Kingman in an envelope addressed to Galban, to Galban's true name. That was JM Wave chief. We're gonna tell you in a minute who he was. And then the chain of custody ends here of her 10-page statement. It says it here that they sent it to the CIA. I mean, to the CIA. And then when the ARB is looking for the statement, okay, I'm sorry, this is 29 November. This is the last document that tells us what happened to it. Attached is a copy of 10-page statement of information obtained by Gobernación during the first detention of subject, 29 November 1963. And then in 1996, fast forward, like Randy says, John Pereira from the CIA is answering the ARB, you know, because the ARB wants to know where is that 10-page statement, the original, which they should have. And they're telling them, you know, this 10-page statement that she apparently gave to the Mexican government, we are searching the JFK records in our possession for the statement and related items, and we'll consult with you the results of the search. Then we get this. Despite the concerted search described below, no such statement has ever been found, and we cannot confirm it ever existed. Rather, the various descriptions in agency files of a statement or a record of interrogation probably refer to the same event. A 10-page report, not the real thing, in Spanish, written by the Mexican police as a record of their interrogation of Duran. No Duran statement was found. And again, multiple copies of the 10-page report were located, but no document which could be called a Duran statement was found. This request was dated May 1996, and it was in particular for a 10-page statement she may have given to the Mexican police. Search its main index system, its name, database, and hard copy files. The agency response dated October 1997 indicated to the ARB no such statement has ever been found. We cannot confirm that it ever existed. This in Spanish is, and I just want to briefly put it up, this is her memoir. It's 11 pages long, which describes exactly what she went through, you know. And right here at the top, you know, John F. Kennedy's ghost chases me. Periodically, it reappears when I think the nightmare is over. It's a very compelling document, and I have it up on my blog in case anybody wants to copy it or read it in full. Number 4, we've talked about this before. the full non-redacted Orestes Peña super secret HSCA testimony where he revealed that Lee was an agent who worked directly for Warren C. DeBrew in New Orleans. Supporting documents from the church committee reveal names of agents who hung out with Lee in New Orleans during the summer of 1963. Orestes Peña and Warren DeBrew. From the new documents, we get a better picture of Warren DeBrew's New Orleans motley crew of informants during the early 1960s, including 1963. Ernesto Jose Rodriguez, this is a guy that we never knew about, and his name starts popping up in the new documents, FBI, CIA informant. Lee, Carlos Brenguier, FBI, who in the new documents tell us that DeBrew sent him to John Birch Societies to see if he could drum up support for the Cuban cause. All right, Orestes Peña, who was an informant for both the FBI and the CIA. Orlando Piedra, who was one of Batista's henchmen, top henchmen in Cuba. He ran the FBI in Cuba, and he had deep connections with the FBI and the CIA. Jesse Core, we spoke about him, Frank Bartes. L.W. Robertson, Postal Inspector, CIA, who better than him to have as an informant? You know, Eduardo Guevara and Roberto Fernandez de Castro. Peña was very specific about Lee's association with federal agents, naming the following: Dave Smith and Wendell Roche. Okay, and I cannot say entering the restaurant, but I saw Oswald and DeBrew with Mr. Dave Smith, Mr. Rogue, he misspells him, but we know that's Roche, from the Immigration Department and other government agents leaving the restaurant and going to the Customs House building, which at the time was an office for different kinds of government agencies. Now, when Roche was contacted by the church committee, the first thing that came out of his mouth said, I also believe, I've been waiting 12 years to talk to someone about this. Okay? And that sort of tells you, you know, that this guy was really associated with Lee. You know, we have the witness, and we know that the people existed. Roche began talking about Oswald. He said he saw him around frequently and recalled that he had an office in, and then the interview, because this is a phone conversation, he cuts him off and he says, no, we want you to come over here and do this in person. Well, guess what? After that, he calls his superiors, you know, and the next day, he's not as cooperative, all right? But at least here, on the second conversation, they're able to get this out of him, that Oswald was known to be one of the men in the group, David Ferry's group. Now, number 3, we're climbing up here. The non-redacted Asham cable and the revelation of his importance to try to prevail on the commission not only retouched the background, we're talking about the Mexico Mystery Man photos, all right? Not only retouched the background in the photos, but also retouched the face to a degree obviously not identifiable with Ruby, but also not with the actual subject of the photo, Ruby. Now that, when I read that, I said, wow, you know, why would they be bringing Ruby into this Mexico City thing? Okay, the Asham cable dated 25 September came as a response to cable Mexi 1011 dated 24. And this had to do with the release, you know, which at that time they termed improper release of the supposed Oswald photos in Mexico City, all right? And what happens here is that Marguerite Oswald pounced on this. And she said, hey, that's not my Lee, you know? So what, you know, what's all this crap, you know, that he went to Mexico City and all this? You know, so obviously she was gonna, you know, take issue with that, okay? Now, this is the Mexi 1011, and this is the one that set up the Asham cable, and it has to do with the release of the photo. And as you can see, his mother and everything here, and they did not want the photo published. But the one who was behind the scenes in publishing the photos was none other than Hoover, all right, J. Edgar Hoover, and Hoover always had that thing, you know, with the CIA. Now, one of the incredible revelations of Mexi 1011 tells us, okay, and this is another one of those instances where one document, when they're separate, they don't mean much, but when you put them together, they do. All right, tell us that they knew exactly who the subject in the photo was. They knew who that guy was. and were afraid that he would go public to absolve himself of any connection to assassination. Logic would tell us that this person was not a random visitor, rather was in some way involved in creating a visual and photographic record of an imposter working to frame Lee at any expense. The above process could also conceivably be triggered by subject on reference photo seeing it and making public statement to clear himself. So the CIA was really nervous about this guy because they knew who he was and they knew that he could, spill the beans. An onslaught of repercussions was feared by the Mexico City station, and the cable is quite explicit about this. Mexi 1011 tells us that the Mexico City station, could not predict security effect it would cause against their wishes, fearing the wide press play the photo was sure to generate, and it sure did. All three photobase houses would feel the heat, receiving close attention and harassment, and the leftist press would have a field day out of all of this, of course. Here are the documents. The ASHAM cable, written by Alan White, who was R.L. Easby, picks up where Mexi 1011 left off, opening up a whole new can of worms in the Mexico City phase of the JFK investigation. New documents presented here also reveal that this ASHAM, who was on the commission, was none other than ex-CIA Director Alan Dulles. Now, here is and obviously you can see here they're talking about prevailing on the commission to not retouch, if they can retouch, or, they're trying to wiggle out of this situation big time that the Mexi 1011 created for them. And within the cable, you get two key names here, Scantling and Herende. Herende, is an incredible story. He's the one that ran the Liempty photographic operation, and we'll see very briefly now an organization chart of his. But regarding ASHAM, here's the document, from ASHAM, and this had to do with the failure of the Bay of Pigs, where he was trying to bring up the morale of all of his chiefs of station around the world, because they had been defeated at the Bay of Pigs. And that's what this cable is about. And it's signed ASHAM at the top and Alan Dulles. And there are many other documents that coincide one with the other, all right? And this is the big fish that got away. Raymond Alvarez Durant, also known as Raymond Herend, And this organization chart tells us of his activities, and he's the one that ran the entire photographic operation called Liempty. Within Liempty, you had projects, Licala, Lyric, Limited, the Photo Truck. All of these, went up towards Herende, and Herende then would answer to his handler at the station. You know how compartmentalized this is? And we learn, as we go more into Herende, about his wife, Hester Roos de Alvarez. She was Dutch, and she was also involved. And a couple of very, very interesting documents, because I've never seen anything where it tells us that the CIA is being blackmailed. And that's exactly what happens here. As you can be aware, it says here, Hester Roos de Alvarez was associated with this agency in Mexico City for a number of years. Now, when they were getting divorced in 1970, this whole thing exploded, because she's got information. And she believes she's got important information that she can bargain with. So, we get this one. Hester Roos de Alvarez and her successful blackmail of the CIA. What information did she possess that was so important to keep suppressed? And here, since Liempty 19 blackmail already succeeded to the extent of $2,500, doubt that anything but large and unwarranted increase would have desired effect, that she could continue to blackmail the agency. So, some kind of agreement, they came to some kind of agreement, and this is the secrecy agreement dated 26 June of 1970, where they part ways and say, look, you cannot talk about this. Number two, the McCone Diary, calendar, journal, whatever you want to call it, which contains 100 days of the year 1963 and only 14 days for the month of November of 1963. All right? So we get this, and very interesting reading. I would recommend this one was released, and we didn't know at first who it belonged to, and then we started to look at the documents that were in the meetings that McCone was having with the president and with his minions, and it was very easy to figure out that it was John McCone. And on 22 November, McCone was meeting and he was interacting with all of his deputies that day, all right? And Bud Whelan, Sherman Kent, Roswell Kilpatrick, oh my God, Ray Klein, okay, Lyman Kirkpatrick, and Richard Helms. On the day of the assassination, and we're going to look at what he did at 12:20, and at 1 o'clock, while JFK in the East is 1 o'clock, in Dallas it's noon time, all right? He's having lunch with Helms, Kent, Kirkpatrick, and Whelan. And they know what's going to happen. But this is the one that really piqued my interest here. At 12:20, he's taking Bundy to the Pentagon for drop-off, McGeorge Bundy. Okay, so what does that mean, And then on November the 22nd in the Journal at 7 p.m., okay, he's joining Gilpatrick for drinks and dinner. And it says President Kennedy assassinated. They're celebrating. Okay, so it was John McCone, Roswell Kilpatrick, and other warmongers who celebrated the day of the JFK assassination as they ushered in the deep state. Now, this one's for Mal. He was talking about burying the lead, and this one is also a recent document. And this is McCone's first meeting with LBJ, okay? And they discuss certain things here, but item number 7 is the one that interests me, where the LBJ cover-up begins. And it says, the president noted with some considerable contempt the fact that certain people in the Department of Justice had suggested to him on Saturday that an independent investigation of the president's assassination should be conducted by a high-level group of attorneys and jurists, probably headed by Governor Dewey. President Johnson rejected the idea and then heard that the identical plan was to be advanced in a lead editorial in the Washington Post. The president felt this was a deliberate plant, and he was exceedingly critical. He personally intervened, but failed with Mr. Al Friendly, and finally killed the editorial with Mrs. Catherine Graham. All right. Now, that's burying the lead. And number 1, and Randy mentioned it, I have to agree with Randy, I have to agree with Douglas Warren on this. Operation Northwood, the details of what came out, all right, on what the plan was, and the arrows tell you exactly what this was all about. So, I'm not going to, repeat what Randy said, but this is the document that we're talking about. And let's talk about a bonus here. With all these new documents, we're able to fill in almost the entire organizational chart of Mexico City at the time of the assassination. Okay? And it identifies names, departments, hierarchies, cryptonyms, and here it is. Very, very interesting because we've been able to set this up in the following manner. Okay, top to bottom. We need battery. Okay, here's McCone. Then Richard Helms answers to him. Ted Shackley. Okay, right there. Joseph King. That was Galvan, by the way. And then Mexico City. Okay, Win Scott. Okay, sorry. The organizational chart, as I was saying, in the very first row at the top, I have to put the 3 Mexican presidents, okay, and the ambassador, Thomas Mann, all right? As we move down to the left, you've got the Russian portion, okay, of the embassy, Russian affairs, okay, that was led by Herbert Manel. Then below the ambassador, you've got Winscott's top deputy, who was Alan White, also known as R.L. Easby. Okay, and then you had John Horton going to the right, Ann Goodpasture, also known as Robert Riggs. She was a very important player in this thing. Okay, Jack Whitten, also known as John Celso, to the right. Going down further down, you were talking here, Herbert Manel, who's with the Russian affairs. You've got David Atlee Phillips, the chief of the Cuban operations. Okay, then you have the people who are managing the surveillance operations. Okay, in this case, Charles Flick, he was running Lee Envoy. Below him, Thomas Keenan, he was running Lee Empty. Okay, Charlotte Bustos to the right, below Celso. Right there. Oops, I can't see this. Here, right there. Very interesting player here, okay? She married in 1962 and to a Argentinian guy, and effectively changing her last name. She was originally from Ohio. Her last name was Zerun. And when she married, it changed her, probably gave her a new identity. She ran the station, and not only that, later on she was named chief of station, and we still don't know, but of a foreign country. She was fluent in Spanish, okay, and she practically ran operations there at Mexico City. And this is basically, this is what fills out the personnel and the people that were, and who was who and who did what, and what responsibilities, you know, they had. And hopefully we'll be able to continue to fill out as we get more documents. But this is what the documents help us do here, arranging, you know, this hierarchy and this organization chart there for Mexico City. And I'm done here, and yeah, we're good. Thank you.
You want to take any questions, Larry?
Yeah, whatever, yeah, whatever.
Anybody have questions for Larry? Yeah, come up to the microphone if you would.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Russ.
What I was saying, Larry, was your talk was very interesting. There was a section where what I saw was McCone's diary, and you were talking about Ross Kilpatrick and Bundy and so on, and that is when your sound went out for about 3 minutes.
All right, well, after that, we presented the document of the meeting of 26 November between McCone and LBJ, where LBJ was killing the editorial by Al Friendly regarding a call for the top jurists of the nation to investigate the JFK assassination, something that LBJ was adamantly opposed to, and where he killed the concept, the idea, when he went straight to the top and spoke to Katharine Graham, at the time the owner of the Washington Post. Her husband had passed away recently, and that was it. The editorial never went, and that was the end of the story.
Larry, there's a lot of, sorry about my voice, a little scratchy today. There was a lot of, there's been a lot of sort of speculation and debate over the origins of the Warren Commission. Is it your opinion that Johnson was involved in the whole thing and had planned to have the whole thing done in Texas, and somehow he was overridden? And if so, how do you explain how that all went down?
Well, don't forget that LBJ was the one person who benefited the most from the assassination. He was about to be thrown in jail.
No, I get that. I'm asking specifically about this bifurcation between the elements that appear to have not wanted a national commission, which you're saying Johnson was part of, and those who clearly did want a national commission, which I assume might include Dulles.
And it did include Dulles,
Right, but how do you think that went down? In other words, if they were both involved in the plot, why this very public disagreement late in the game?
your guess is as good as mine. The point here of what we're talking about is how LBJ killed, a very important editorial that never hit the streets and would have influenced public opinion. That's the point of mentioning this here.
I was wondering why the Sylvia Odie,
Duran.
why would they torture her and so forth? Why did they eliminated so many other people? They just whacked them, no sweat. Why did they go to such an extent? Because it seems counterproductive. When you torture a person, there's no guarantee what they say is true, and also she would still be alive to be able to contradict her forced confession. Mm-hmm. I don't understand the whole purpose of that.
Yeah, well, you got to understand at the time, the Mexican presidents were surrounded with very, very bad people, and there was one in particular who was involved in the interrogation, okay, Gutierrez Barrios, who was known as El Pollo, and he's the one that did the actual interrogation of Sylvia. And they did, they overdid what they, to her, at the same. That's a good point, but some of these, let's not forget this was not done everything a specific plan. I see that this was like they were inventing as they went, and that would be a good situation here to explain that. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Rivera. As I was telling you yesterday, one of the things I love about Larry's work is he makes the complex so much easier to understand. And I really loved what he was doing here and helping, put the names to these identities and kind of get that flow of who was the power structure. And I was blown away when I saw the connection between the Mexican presidents and the CIA. I had no idea prior to that. So ladies and gentlemen, let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back and we'll have Gary Fannin. 5 minutes.